The first flicker of the red breaking news banner on my television made the crystal glass in my hand tremble. I'd been sipping an Oregon Pinot, the kind with just enough bite to keep me honest, while the late evening skyline of Seattle melted into violet dusk outside my loft's wall of windows. The city glittered like it had something to prove. My phone buzzed once, then again. On the marble counter. Messages stacked up in a blur of preview bubbles, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the screen. The anchor's voice sharpened, almost slicing through the quiet hum of the wine fridge. "Breaking," she began, before the words dissolved into a static-filled pause. I smoothed the cuff of my silk blouse, willing my heartbeat to slow. To anyone else, I probably looked perfectly composed, a 30-something consultant who'd mastered the art of staying unbothered. But inside, the memory of a single sentence from 10 years ago still lived like a splinter under the skin. "You're nothing but a burden, Olivia," my father had said, loud enough for the entire family dinner to hear, before raising his glass to toast my brother's promotion. The sting of that night never really dulled. I'd simply built a life big enough to hide it behind. Now, as CNN's feed steadied and the anchor leaned closer to the camera, I felt the old wound throb again, warning me that whatever came next might finally drag the past into the light. 10 years earlier, August 2015, the air in my father's dining room felt thick enough to chew. The Hayes house in Portland always smelled faintly of cedar polish and my mother's lavender candles, but that night the scent did nothing to calm the knot in my stomach. Dad sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a silver cufflink catching the chandelier's light as he raised his glass. My older brother, Daniel, freshly promoted at the investment firm where Dad had pulled strings for him, sat tall and pleased, the golden child in a navy suit. "To Daniel," Dad announced, his baritone smooth and certain, "who carries the Hayes name forward with pride." Crystal clinked. Even the chandelier seemed to glow warmer for him. I forced a polite smile, my palms damp beneath the linen napkin. I had just finished a master's in urban planning and was freelancing, juggling small city contracts, hardly glamorous work in my father's eyes. Then came the words I still hear in the quiet before sleep. "And to Olivia," Dad added with a faint smirk, "who, well, remains our charming family burden." A ripple of awkward laughter skittered around the table, like a cold draft. My mother looked down at her plate. Daniel took a long sip of wine, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. Heat flared in my chest. I tried to swallow it, but my hands betrayed me, trembling as I set down my fork. "That's not funny," I said softly, barely audible. Dad only shrugged, as if he'd swatted a fly. "It's a joke, Olivia. Don't be so sensitive." The lump in my throat grew heavy and sharp. I wanted to scream, to list every late-night draft I'd written, every grant proposal I'd fought for, every inch of work that had never needed his approval. But the room blurred. My voice stuck. After dinner, I slipped onto the back porch where the night air smelled of wet pine. My grandmother's quilt, the one she'd given me just before she passed, was folded over a rocking chair. I wrapped it around my shoulders and breathed in the faint scent of her rosewater perfume. Her last words echoed, words I'd barely understood at the time. "Build something they can't take credit for." That night, under the wash of moonlight and humiliation, I made a quiet vow. I wouldn't argue anymore. I'd simply leave, and build a life so unmistakably mine that no one could ever dismiss it as a burden again. I left Portland before sunrise 2 weeks later, my grandmother's quilt folded neatly on the passenger seat of my dented Corolla. The road stretched like a dare toward San Francisco, the city where dreams were said to sprout from cracked sidewalks and late-night coffee. I clutched a notebook full of half-baked ideas, projects that might never earn a dime, and a quiet fury that burned hotter than fear. At first, success looked nothing like the glossy fantasies on my vision board. I slept in a sublet the size of my father's pantry and lived on black coffee and grocery store ramen. By day, I cold emailed city departments, pitching proposals to turn abandoned lots into microparks. Most never replied. By night, I sketched blueprints on the quilt spread across the floor, her rosewater scent now faint but steady, like a whisper. build something they can't take credit for. On my lowest nights, when rejection emails piled higher than unpaid bills, I found an unlikely ally. Marianne Brooks, a city planning veteran with a shock of silver hair and an impatience for men who spoke over her, invited me to shadow her team. "You've got fire, kid," she said after watching me defend a concept for a green-roofed library at a public forum. "Don't waste it apologizing for existing." Her mentorship became my compass. I learned how to write grants that sang, how to navigate backroom politics, how to keep my chin level when someone called me sweetheart in a board meeting. Each small victory, the city's first pilot micropark, a modest consulting contract, an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle, felt like laying another brick in a fortress no one could tear down. 3 years in, my consulting firm, Hayes Urban Renewal, the name a deliberate, quiet reclamation, landed a multi-million-dollar contract to redesign the waterfront. I signed the deal in a second-hand blazer with chipped nail polish, barely breathing as the final signature dried. I didn't post a word about it. Not when the firm grew to 20 employees, not when we won the governor's award for sustainable development, not even when my own apartment boasted a view of the Bay Bridge and a kitchen my mother would have swooned over. When Dad called occasionally, rare, perfunctory calls on birthdays, I kept my answers tidy. "Consulting's fine," I'd say. "Keeping busy." I heard his polite disinterest, the unspoken assumption that I was still dabbling in something small. And I let him believe it, because every quiet success tasted sweeter wrapped in secrecy. Every project that transformed a cracked alley into a green oasis was another step away from the night he called me a burden. The silence wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. I wanted the reveal, when it finally came, to be undeniable. 5 years after I'd driven away under a bruised Oregon sky, my company's work was about to make national headlines. And that was the night CNN's red banner flared across my television, ready to cut straight through the quiet empire I had built in secret. The Hayes family reunion was supposed to be small, a quiet evening in my parents' Portland home to celebrate Daniel's latest career milestone, senior partner, the invitation card read in metallic gold. I had driven up from Seattle in my new electric SUV, its paint the color of storm clouds. No one commented when I parked at the curb. Inside, the house looked frozen in time. Cedar polish, lavender candles, and the same chandelier whose light had once burned humiliation into my memory. My mother hugged me quickly, distracted by the bustle of servers carrying trays of miniature crab cakes. Daniel stood near the fireplace, a bourbon in hand, laughing with colleagues in suits so dark they seemed to absorb the room's glow. Dad spotted me last. "Olivia," he said, as if tasting the name after a long absence. "Good you could make it. Daniel's big night." I smiled, the professional kind that hides 1,000 unsaid things. Wouldn't miss it. We were mid-toast when every phone in the room buzzed. A chime of alerts rippled through the crowd. My own phone vibrated against the stem of my wine glass. The television, muted in the corner, suddenly flashed a red banner. "Breaking news. San Francisco Waterfront Redevelopment Project wins National Award, led by Hayes Urban Renewal." The anchor's voice sharpened through the speakers someone had unmuted in confusion. Founder and CEO Olivia Hayes has transformed derelict coastal property into a model of sustainable urban design, now studied by cities across the nation. A hush fell so complete, I could hear the fizz of champagne. Dad's glass hovered midair. "Olivia?" His voice cracked like dry wood. "That's you?" Daniel asked, eyes narrowing. I set my glass down, the stem steady between my fingers. "Yes. My firm has been leading the waterfront project for the past 2 years. We just won the governor's award. CNN wanted the exclusive." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel blinked, as though recalibrating a world where his little sister was the headline. Dad finally lowered his glass, but his jaw remained tight. "You never mentioned any of this." I met his gaze, without flinching. "You never asked." A collective exhale swept the room. Behind me, someone whispered, "She's the one who," and then trailed off. I took a slow breath, the scent of cedar and lavender suddenly sweeter. "I built something you can't take credit for," I said, my grandmother's words slipping effortlessly into the space between us. Daniel swallowed hard, his earlier swagger deflating. Olivia, that's amazing. For the first time, my father's face betrayed something other than certainty. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition. Perhaps even a hint of shame. I let the silence stretch, each second a quiet reckoning. The power shift wasn't in the award or the national coverage. It was in my choice to let them witness it, without anger, without pleading. Dad finally cleared his throat. I misjudged you, he said, the admission small but heavy. I gave a calm, almost gentle nod.
Yes.
You did. The chandelier above seemed to glow brighter, as if it had waited 10 years to shine this way. Silence followed the CNN segment like a dropped curtain. For a moment, all I heard was the low hiss of the gas fireplace and the faint buzz of the city below my windows. My father stood frozen near the doorway, still clutching the stem of his wineglass as if he'd forgotten how to drink. The breaking news anchor had laid it out in a voice free of doubt. Hayes Urban Renewal, founded and led by Olivia Hayes, wins the federal contract to spearhead the West Coast Climate Resilient Waterfront Initiative, the largest urban renewal project in a generation. I watched Dad glance at Daniel, whose face was flushed to startled crimson. Well, Dad finally said, the single word scraping like dry bark. I didn't realize. No. I cut in gently, my voice steadier than my racing heart. You didn't. I set my glass down and rose, the soft rustle of my silk blouse loud in the hush. And that's okay. I built this without you. His eyes flicked to the framed sketches on the wall, park designs, waterfront blueprints, award plaques. For the first time, he seemed to see them as more than decoration. I'm not here to humiliate anyone, I continued. But if we're going to have a family again, things need to change. I turned first to my brother. Daniel, you've spent years living up to expectations Dad set for you, and down to the ones he set for me. I want you to chase what you actually want, not the promotion that makes Dad clap the loudest. Figure it out, and be brave enough to tell him. Daniel swallowed, nodding, the tension in his shoulders loosening by a fraction. Then I faced Dad. You once called me a burden. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for respect. Every day, in every word. And for Mom's sake, I want you to finally see both of your children as equals. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The weight of the pause said more than any quick apology could. These aren't demands, I said, softer now. They're conditions for us to heal. I love you, Dad. But love doesn't mean I'll shrink anymore. My mother, who had been silent until then, reached for my hand. It's time, she whispered, looking at my father. The old ache in my chest eased, not because I'd won, but because I'd spoken the truth without flinching. Dad lowered his glass and gave a single, slow nod. I can do that, he said at last, the words almost a vow. I let the silence stretch until even the television's low hum seemed to vibrate through the marble countertop. Dad cleared his throat first, that same baritone that had once branded me a burden now ragged with something close to uncertainty. So, this is all you? He asked, gesturing at the sleek office visible behind me on the live CNN split screen. The network had kept my video feed open after the segment. The host had thanked me for Hayes Urban Renewal's transformative work and signed off. But our family group call, my parents in Portland, Daniel in Chicago, remained stubbornly connected. All mine, I said evenly. Every grant, every contract. No shortcuts, no family strings. Mom's eyes glistened, but she stayed quiet. Daniel finally broke in, a half-smile flickering like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or defensive. Liv, this is wow. I rested the quilt across the back of my chair, the same quilt that had warmed me on the night of my vow. There are a few things I need to say. I began, my voice calm but edged with a firmness that surprised even me. First, I turned to Dad. You will stop calling people burdens. Not just me, anyone. Words like that take root. You don't get to plant poison and call it humor. His face reddened. He nodded once. Second, I looked at Daniel. You're brilliant, but you coast. Use the advantages you have to build something that isn't handed to you. Mentor someone. Give back. Daniel swallowed hard. Okay, he said quietly. Third, I continued, my eyes sweeping both of them. This family will start acknowledging the women who hold it together. Mom's quiet labor isn't invisible anymore. Celebrate her. Support her. For the first time, Mom lifted her chin and met my gaze. A slow, grateful smile curved her lips. I'm not offering money, I said finally.
This isn't about that.
But if you're ready to grow, I'll stand beside you. If not, I'll keep building my work, with or without your blessing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, charged with possibility. Dad exhaled, a long, unsteady sound. Olivia, he said, my name, not a nickname, not a throwaway. I was wrong. About all of it. A tremor of old hurt loosened in my chest, replaced by something steadier, the quiet power of choosing the terms. I reached for the quilt and let its soft weave settle across my lap. Then let's start there, I said. The weeks that followed felt like watching spring push through winter, slow, tentative, but impossible to stop. Daniel was the first to call. Not a terse text, but an actual call, his voice low with something that sounded like humility. Liv, I'm sorry, he said, for laughing that night, for never standing up. He admitted he'd replayed the moment when the CNN anchor had said my name, while Dad sat pale and speechless. He said it broke something in him too. Mom visited next. She brought lemon scones and a quiet determination. In my sunlit kitchen, she squeezed my hand. I should have defended you, she whispered. I let his pride drown out my own voice. The regret in her eyes was raw and real. Even Dad changed, but not overnight. He called a week later, his words careful, almost fragile. Olivia, he began, like testing the weight of my name. I was wrong. About everything. A pause stretched, and then, softer. You built something I never even imagined. I'm proud of you. The words didn't erase the years of silence or the night of that cruel toast. But they were a start, an unsteady bridge over old wounds. One evening, after the calls and the cautious truce, I unfolded my grandmother's quilt across my sofa. The rosewater scent had faded, but the fabric still held her warmth. I traced a finger along the worn stitching and remembered her final advice. Build something they can't take credit for.
I had.
And now, as the city lights of Seattle shimmered through the windows, I felt no need for CNN's spotlight, no hunger for applause. My success wasn't revenge, it was proof. Proof that a so-called burden had become a builder. I smiled, letting the quiet settle around me like the quilt's soft embrace. My name, I whispered into the dusk, has always been enough.